The courtyard air was still, holding the weight of a single sharp question. Character. 2 stood before Jesus, his posture rigid, his gaze locked and unwavering. This was not a casual inquiry. It was a test of boundaries. "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" he asked. The words hung in the space between them, demanding a definitive answer. Jesus did not look away. He returned the question to its source, grounding the conversation in the familiar structures of the law. Character. 2 recited the requirements with practiced precision. "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." It was the correct answer, spoken with an expert's confidence. But then, the atmosphere shifted. Character. 2 leaned in, his eyes narrowing slightly as he sought to define the limits of his obligation. "And who," he asked, "is my neighbor?" Jesus stood silent for a moment, the courtyard quiet around them. He began to speak, and as his voice carried, the scene of the courtyard began to blur, replaced by the harsh, sun-baked descent of the road to Jericho. The descent toward Jericho offered no mercy. The path narrowed, winding through limestone crags that trapped the heat of the midday sun. Character. 3 walked alone, his steady rhythm the only sound against the dry wind. He did not see the movement in the shadows until it was too late. The rocks erupted. Figures surged forward, cutting off the path ahead and behind. There was no time to bargain. A blunt force struck his shoulder, spinning him into the grit. He reached for his pouch, but hands tore it away before he could offer resistance. Another blow caught him in the ribs, driving the air from his lungs. He hit the ground hard, his face pressing into the hot, loose earth. The sound of tearing fabric echoed in the canyon as they stripped him of his belongings. He tried to push himself up, but a final strike silenced his effort. The footsteps retreated, the crunch of boots on gravel fading quickly into the distance. Silence returned to the path, heavier than before. Character. 3 lay motionless in the dust, his breath shallow and irregular. The road stretched out empty, marked only by the scattered remnants of his journey and the darkening stains on the parched ground. Minutes stretched into an hour under the relentless sun. The heat waves shimmered off the limestone, distorting the horizon. Then, a new sound cut through the silence, the rhythmic, steady clip of a steady gait. A man appeared at the bend of the road, moving with the purpose of one who has a destination to reach. As he drew closer, his pace remained constant, unhurried by the desolate terrain. He reached the spot where the body lay sprawled in the dust. He stopped, his head turned, his gaze falling directly upon the broken form of the traveler. The air seemed to hold its breath. The man stood there for a heartbeat, his presence looming over the injured figure. The victim's hand twitched, a faint, desperate movement in the dirt. The observer did not kneel. He did not reach out to check for a pulse or offer a drop of water. Instead, he shifted his weight, his eyes hardening as he turned his back on the suffering. He stepped deliberately to the far edge of the path, widening the distance between himself and the man in the dust. With a single, fluid motion, he quickened his pace, his figure shrinking into the distance until he was nothing more than a shadow disappearing around the bend, leaving the road silent once again. The dust settled again, but the road did not stay empty for long. From the same direction as the first traveler, a second figure emerged. He walked with a measured, deliberate stride, his eyes scanning the horizon ahead. He did not seem to notice the state of the path until he was almost upon the victim. He skidded to a halt, the sound of his sandals scraping against the stone ringing out in the canyon. He stood over the traveler, staring down at the bruised face and the blood drying in the heat. For a long moment, the only sound was the low hum of flies circling the broken man. The Levite looked left, then right, checking the solitude of the canyon. He shifted his grip on his staff, his knuckles turning white. He reached out a hand, hovering for a fraction of a second, but then pulled it back as if burned. The hesitation vanished, replaced by a cold, calculated indifference. He moved to the extreme opposite side of the road, giving the body a wide berth. He did not look back. He increased his pace, his frame growing smaller against the blinding white glare of the limestone walls. The victim remained in the center of the road, his chest barely rising. Forgotten by the second man who had walked this path, the canyon returned to its oppressive stillness. The sun remained fixed in the sky, baking the earth until the air shimmered with heat. The victim lay motionless, his presence barely distinguishable from the surrounding stone and dust. Then, a new sound vibrated through the ground. It was not the hurried, light footfalls of the previous men, but the heavy, rhythmic clip of a donkey moving at a steady, labored pace. The sound grew louder, echoing off the limestone walls of the narrow pass. A figure rounded the bend, his frame hunched against the glare of the morning. He traveled with a rugged, worn appearance, his face etched by years of exposure to the elements. The victim remained sprawled in the center of the path, a silent obstacle in the traveler's way. The donkey slowed, its ears flicking as it sensed the presence on the ground. The man pulled the reins, bringing the animal to a complete halt. He looked down, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the scene. The silence returned, heavy and thick with uncertainty. Would he turn away like the others? Or was this the end of the traveler's isolation? The man on the donkey shifted his weight, dismounted with a grunt, and stepped directly into the dust, his shadow falling over the broken body. The Samaritan knelt into the grit, his knees sinking into the hot, loose earth. He did not look for a way around. He placed a hand against the traveler's neck, feeling for the faint, thready pulse beneath the skin. It was there, but barely. He shifted his weight, reaching into his pack for a water skin. He tilted the man's head back, his movements practiced and steady, and trickled cool water between parched, cracked lips. The man groaned, a low, rasping sound that broke the canyon's silence. The Samaritan turned his attention to the worst of the gashes. He uncorked a flask of wine, the sharp, acidic scent cutting through the dust. He poured it directly onto the deep, jagged wounds. The victim's body arched, muscles twitching in involuntary reflex, but the Samaritan kept his hands firm. He followed the sting of the wine with a thick, soothing oil, his fingers working slowly to massage the substance into the bruised and broken flesh. He pressed his palms against the skin, drawing out the heat of the infection. The man's breathing, once shallow and erratic, deepened, evening out into a rhythmic, labored cycle. The Samaritan did not stop. He worked with a singular focus, ignoring the heat of the sun and the isolation of the road, until the bleeding slowed to a stop. The Samaritan reached for a piece of clean, sturdy cloth from his pack. He tore it into long, narrow strips, the sound of the fabric ripping sharp in the dry air. With precise, careful movements, he began to wrap the wounded limbs, pulling the bandages tight enough to hold, yet gentle enough to avoid further pain. He secured the knots with a final, firm tug. Now came the true challenge. The victim was dead weight, his body limp and fragile. The Samaritan stood, bracing his feet against the uneven stones. He crouched, hooked his arms beneath the man's shoulders, and heaved. The strain showed in the cords of his neck and the sweat dripping from his brow. He grunted with the effort, slowly straightening until he had the man gathered into his arms. He shuffled toward the donkey, which waited patiently, its head drooping in the heat. With one final push, he maneuvered the man onto the animal's back, securing him so he would not slide. The Samaritan took the reins, his own body now positioned to steady the man against the jolts of the path. He began to walk. Every step was deliberate. He moved slowly, his eyes scanning the horizon, shielding the man from the worst of the sun's glare as they started the long, arduous trek towards safety. The inn appeared as a cluster of stone walls against the deepening purple of the twilight. The Samaritan guided the donkey into the courtyard, his boots dragging slightly from the miles walked. He did not seek rest for himself. He carefully lowered the traveler, easing him onto a woven mat in the corner of a quiet room. The innkeeper brought a basin of water, but the Samaritan took it from him. Kneeling again to wipe the dust of the road from the man's face, he trimmed the wicks of the oil lamps, casting a warm, steady glow against the walls. The night air turned cool, but the Samaritan remained. He sat on a wooden stool, his posture fixed and alert. When the man tossed in his sleep, the Samaritan was there to adjust the blankets or offer a cooling cloth to his forehead. He did not sleep. He watched the rise and fall of the stranger's chest, counting the slow, steady rhythm of returning life. Every time the man reached out in a delirium of pain, the Samaritan caught his hand and held it, grounding him in the quiet safety of the room. The hours stretched, marked only by the shifting shadows of the lamp, until the first gray light of morning began to bleed through the cracks in the doorframe. Morning arrived with a sharp, clear light. The Samaritan stood, his joints stiff from the night-long vigil. He checked the traveler one final time. The man's breathing was deep and rhythmic. The crisis passed. He stepped out into the courtyard, where the innkeeper was sweeping the dust of the previous day. The Samaritan reached into his pouch and drew out 2 silver denarii. He pressed the coins into the innkeeper's calloused palm. The innkeeper looked at the silver, then at the room where the traveler lay, his brow furrowed with the weight of the burden. The Samaritan did not wait for an argument. He looked the man directly in the eyes. "Take care of him," he said, his voice low and steady. "Whatever more you spend, I will repay when I return." He did not offer a date or a guarantee beyond his word. He turned toward the road, his pace purposeful. He had done more than save a life. He had accepted the future cost of that life. He walked out of the courtyard and back toward the horizon, leaving the innkeeper standing in the doorway, the coins cold and heavy in his hand, looking after the man who had turned a stranger into a neighbor. The sun hung high over the courtyard, casting sharp, clear shadows across the stone floor. The dust of the road seemed worlds away, yet the story remained suspended in the air between them. Jesus looked at the expert in the law, his gaze steady and waiting. He did not speak of abstract concepts. He spoke of choices made in the dirt. "Which of these 3," Jesus asked, "became a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers?" The expert stood silent for a moment. He looked at the ground, then back at Jesus, the weight of the parable settling into the space between them. There was no room for legal debate, only the truth of the action taken. "The one who showed mercy," the expert replied, his voice stripped of its earlier pride. Jesus nodded, a finality in the movement that held the force of a promise. He looked at the man, not as an adversary, but as someone standing on the threshold of a new way of living. "Go," Jesus said, "and do the same." The courtyard fell into a profound, expectant silence. The question of who qualified as a neighbor had been answered, not by a definition, but by the memory of a man walking a road, choosing to stop, choosing to serve, and choosing to care.